Eleanor, I need you on IV access and vitals only in trauma 2. Let Dr. Chen and me handle the primary assessment. We've got a bad one coming in. The charge nurse, Maria, didn't look up from her screen. Her words clipped and efficient. The emergency room at County General was a symphony of controlled chaos, a place where seconds were measured in heartbeats and the fluorescent lights hummed with a relentless, indifferent energy. Eleanor Vance nodded, her expression unreadable. At 62, with hair the color of soft ash pulled back in a simple, tight bun, she was a fixture in this ER, a constant presence many of the younger staff took for granted. They saw a competent, quiet, older nurse. They saw someone who moved with a deliberate economy of motion they sometimes mistook for slowness. They didn't see the decades of experience etched into the fine lines around her eyes, or the unnerving stillness in her hands that could thread a needle in a moving vehicle. She pulled a fresh set of gloves from the dispenser, the snap of latex, a small, sharp report, and the cacophony of beeping monitors and rolling gurneys. She didn't mind being assigned the basics. In a crisis, the basics were what saved a life. The automatic doors hissed open and the paramedics burst through, their movements a blur of practiced urgency. On the gurney was a man, maybe early 50s, his face pale and slick with sweat beneath a layer of grime and dust. His work clothes, thick canvas and denim, were shredded around his right thigh, and a grotesque length of rusted rebar protruded from the muscle, dark blood staining the fabric around it. A construction site accident. Male, 54, name's Robert Peterson, the lead paramedic rattled off. Impaled by rebar on a demo site. Vitals were stable in the field, but he's dropping. BP is 90/60 and falling. GCS is 13. He's conscious, but fading. We started a saline drip, but couldn't get a second line due to positioning. Dr. Chen, young, sharp, and radiating the unshakable confidence of a third-year resident, met the gurney. All right, let's get him in 2. On my count. 1, 2, 3, lift. They transferred the man to the trauma bed, a clumsy, careful dance around the iron rod sticking out of his leg. Chen began barking orders, his voice high and tight with adrenaline. I need a full trauma panel. Type and cross. Get X-ray down here now. Eleanor, where are we on that second IV? Eleanor was already there, her fingers palpating the man's left arm with a light, sure touch that seemed at odds with the frantic energy swirling around her. The man's veins were collapsing from the shock and blood loss. It was like trying to find a thread in a puddle of water. A younger nurse might have jabbed and missed, causing more trauma. Eleanor closed her eyes for a half second, a centering breath that went unnoticed by everyone. She relied on feel, on memory, on the thousands of arms she had held in far worse conditions than this. Her thumb anchored the vein, and with a single fluid motion, she slid the 18-gauge catheter in. A perfect flash of red confirmed she was in. She secured the line and opened the saline drip wide, her movements calm and efficient. Second line is in and running, doctor, she said, her voice a low counterpoint to the room's rising panic. The man on the bed groaned, his eyelids fluttering. His gaze was unfocused, clouded with pain. Easy now, Eleanor murmured, her hand resting for a moment on his shoulder. It was a gesture of instinct, a small point of human contact in a storm of clinical procedure. Dr. Chen was focused on the wound itself, his brow furrowed. The entry point is high on the quadriceps. We need to assess for femoral artery involvement. Someone get the portable ultrasound in here. The monitor above the bed suddenly screamed, a high, piercing alarm. Peterson's blood pressure had cratered. He's crashing, a tech yelled. Chen's head snapped up, his face paling slightly. Push another liter of saline. Get O-neg blood from the cooler, now. The room became a vortex of activity. People moved, machines beeped, voices overlapped. But Eleanor's attention narrowed. She wasn't looking at the monitor. She was looking at the man. His skin had taken on a waxy gray pallor. His breathing was shallow, a fish gasp for air. She saw the subtle distension in his abdomen, the way the muscles were unnaturally tight. A sign Chen, in his focus on the obvious horrific leg injury, had missed. This wasn't just blood loss from the leg. He was bleeding internally. The rebar hadn't just gone in. It had likely tumbled him, the blunt force trauma causing damage elsewhere. Doctor, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority, check his abdomen. He's rigid. Chen shot her an irritated glance. I'm a little busy keeping him from bleeding out of his leg, Eleanor. Just hang the blood. He turned back to the wound, trying to apply pressure around the impalement without dislodging the rebar further. It was a textbook response, but the textbook wasn't breathing for this man. The patient, Robert, gasped again, his head thrashing on the pillow. His eyes, wide with fear and pain, found nothing to lock onto. He was lost in the fog of shock. Eleanor ignored the doctor's dismissal. She moved to the head of the bed, her movements still unhurried, yet filled with a profound sense of purpose. She leaned down, her mouth close to the man's ear, shielding her words from the chaos of the room. This was a critical moment, the tipping point where a patient either gave up or found an anchor to hold on to. She knew this moment intimately. She had lived in it for years, in places far louder and more desperate than this sterile white room. Her voice was not the professional detached tone of a nurse. It was something else. It was low, resonant, and impossibly calm, a steady rhythm against the frantic beat of the heart monitor. Robert, my name is Eleanor. You are in a hospital. You've been hurt, but you are safe now. I need you to listen to my voice. Just focus on the sound. We are not going to let you go. You have to hold on. Do you understand me? You have to hold on. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her voice was a lifeline thrown into a churning sea, a solid thing in a world that had dissolved into pain and confusion. It was a voice forged in the back of roaring helicopters over the whine of engines and the screams of wounded men. It was a voice that had promised survival when all evidence pointed to the contrary. It was a voice that knew how to speak directly to the primal core of a person hanging on by a thread. The effect was immediate and startling. The man's frantic movements stilled. His breathing, while still ragged, seemed to find a rhythm matching the cadence of her words. His eyes, which had been rolling back, now fixed on a point on the ceiling. He was listening. The change was so pronounced that even Dr. Chen, in his adrenaline-fueled haze, noticed it. He glanced over, a flicker of confusion on his face, before turning back to his work. The blood was being hung, the ultrasound was rolling in. They were still in the fight. But the man on the bed, Robert, was no longer just a collection of symptoms and failing vital signs. He was a person, anchored to the world by the sound of a woman's voice. And in the depths of his shock-addled mind, a connection was being made. A wire, long buried, was suddenly carrying a current. His lips parted, a dry, cracking sound. He tried to form a word. At first, it was just a rasp. Then, a whisper, so quiet only Eleanor could hear it. Angel. Her hand, which was still resting on his shoulder, tensed for a fraction of a second. It was the only sign she'd heard. She kept her voice steady. That's right, Robert. You just hold on. We've got you. We've all got you. Just breathe with me now, in and out. But the man's mind was elsewhere, or rather, elsewhen. The sterile smell of the ER was being replaced by the memory of wet earth and diesel fumes. The fluorescent hum was giving way to the rhythmic whump, whump, whump of rotor blades beating against thick, humid air. His voice was a little stronger now, a hoarse, wondering sound that made the tech hanging the blood bag pause and look over. The voice. I know. That voice. Dr. Chen was now using the ultrasound probe on the man's abdomen, his eyes fixed on the screen. Massive internal bleeding. He's got a ruptured spleen. Damn it, that's why he's crashing. Maria, call the OR. Tell them we're coming up. Stat. He was finally seeing what Eleanor had sensed minutes earlier. But Robert wasn't listening to him. His gaze was now fixed on Eleanor's face, though his eyes struggled to focus. It wasn't her face he was seeing. It was a memory of a face, lit by the dim red light of a chopper's interior, framed by a helmet and streaked with rain and someone else's blood. Honduras, he whispered. The word hung in the air, utterly alien in the context of the County General ER. 1985. The mud. It was raining so hard. Eleanor went completely still. Her professional calm, the shield she had worn for decades, was gone. In its place was a look of profound, heart-stopping recognition. Her eyes, which had been a calm, clinical gray, were suddenly vast, filled with the ghosts of a monsoon season 30 years gone. Dr. Chen looked up from his ultrasound, his brow furrowed in annoyance. What's he talking about? Is he delirious? Robert's hand, which had been lying limp, moved with surprising strength and gripped Eleanor's wrist. His knuckles were white. You. It was you, he said, his voice gaining a raw emotional power. I was pinned. Shrapnel from a training exercise. Everyone thought I was gone. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, but he didn't let go. But you wouldn't leave. You kept talking, just like now. He looked past her at the other faces in the room, then back to her. They called you the angel of the Dustoff, because you never lost anyone on your bird. Not once. The room had gone silent. The only sounds were the steady beeping of the monitor, which had miraculously stabilized slightly, and Robert Peterson's ragged breathing. Dr. Chen stared, the ultrasound probe dangling forgotten in his hand. Maria, the charge nurse, had her hand over her mouth. They were all looking at Eleanor Vance, the quiet, unassuming woman who always took the extra shift, who always remembered everyone's birthday, who they thought they knew. And they were realizing they didn't know her at all. Eleanor finally looked down at the man's hand gripping her wrist. She gently covered it with her own. Her composure returned, but it was different now. It was softer, more vulnerable. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the fine lines on her cheek. I remember the rain, she said, her voice thick with unshed emotion. And I remember a young corporal who wouldn't stop quoting movies, even with a collapsed lung. A weak, rattling chuckle came from Robert's chest. Had to keep spirits up, ma'am. He used the honorific without thinking, a reflex buried for 30 years. You told me to hang on, he whispered, his eyes closing as the first wave of pain medication began to take hold. And I did. The journey to the operating room was a quiet, solemn procession. Dr. Chen pushed the gurney himself, refusing to let an orderly take over. He didn't speak. He just kept glancing at Eleanor, who walked alongside Robert, her hand never leaving his. He was watching her, studying the set of her jaw, the straightness of her back, the incredible calm that had once again settled over her. He was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about competence, about experience, about the practice of medicine itself. He had been trained to see the body as a machine and to follow a diagnostic flowchart. He had protocols and algorithms for everything, but he had no protocol for what he had just witnessed. He had no algorithm for the sheer force of will that had anchored a dying man to life, a connection forged in a forgotten conflict decades ago and reignited by the simple sound of a voice. He had been trying to fix a machine. Eleanor had been tending to a soul. Hours later, Robert was stable in the intensive care unit. The surgery had been difficult, but successful. They had repaired his spleen, and the orthopedic team had carefully removed the rebar and stabilized his leg. He was intubated and sedated, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that now breathed and beat for him. Eleanor finished her shift, the paperwork a mindless mechanical task. The usual post-shift exhaustion was absent, replaced by a thrumming, resonant energy, the echo of a past that had just collided violently with her present. As she was gathering her things, Dr. Chen approached her. He looked different. The cocksure arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling humility. He held a tablet in his hand. I looked up your service record, he stammered, not quite meeting her eye. It's mostly classified, but it says you were a captain. Air Force Nurse Corps, aeromedical evacuation. It lists commendations, a lot of them. He finally looked at her. You never said anything. Eleanor simply shrugged, pulling her worn cardigan over her scrubs. Nothing to say. It was a long time ago. A different life. You saved him, Eleanor, Chen said, his voice quiet. Back then, and today. I was following the book. You were treating the patient. She gave him a small, tired smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. The book is important, Doctor. It keeps us grounded. But sometimes you have to remember there's a person inside the pages. You'll get there. She didn't go straight home. Instead, she took the elevator up to the ICU. The ward was quiet. The lights dimmed. The rhythmic hiss and beep of the ventilators was the only sound. She stood by Robert's bedside for a long time, just watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. He was no longer the dusty, bleeding man from the ER, nor the young, terrified corporal from her memory. He was just a man, sleeping, healing. She reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of graying hair off his forehead. 30 years. 30 years he had lived, had a family. built a life. 30 years he almost didn't get. She had seen so many who weren't so lucky. Their faces were a permanent gallery in her memory. Young men she had held and spoken to, just as she had spoken to Robert, whose fight had ended in the back of her helicopter under a rainy sky. Her quiet promise, "We don't leave our people behind," had been a shield against the crushing reality that sometimes, despite everything, you had to. But not this one. Not this time. And not that time. This one she had gotten to bring home. Twice. Robert's eyes flickered open. The sedation was wearing off. He saw her standing there, a silhouette against the dim light of the hallway. He couldn't speak past the tube in his throat, but he didn't need to. His eyes, clear and lucid, filled with a gratitude so profound it was a physical presence in the room. He lifted his hand, the one not bristling with IV lines, and she took it. His grip was weak, but it was there. A connection, a circle, closed after 3 decades. She stood with him in the quiet hum of the machines, a silent guardian, an angel who had finally seen one of her charges safely home.